Hi, Jeannie. So it is 2:15 according to my computer, so we're going to go ahead and get started. As you may have just guessed, my name is Mary Shehan-Boogaard, and I am the Community Inclusion Coordinator for the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council. I'm lead staff for the council's initiatives on supportive decision-making and a few other initiatives like sexuality education and expanding employment for youth. I'm also the family member of 3 people with disabilities. I grew up with an aunt that had Down syndrome. My brother Roy, who has since passed away, had a closed head injury from a brain tumor early on. So our growing up years involved me, being the bratty little sister to a person with a disability. And I now have an adoptive brother who is on the autism spectrum. So I come at this topic from a lot of different perspectives, as a psychologist, as an advocate, and as a bratty little sister and bratty little aunt and bratty little cousin. So that's who I am. And I am today with an amazing peer mentor, and I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Well, I thank you for the resounding intro there. My name is Jake Schaafsma. I'm a person with lived experience. I was born fetal alcohol syndrome disorder positive. I screened positive for it. Luckily, most of the physical attributes of that missed me, and I grew up widely accepted in the ableist culture, and then I had my car accident when I was 17 and I lost my arm. And once I had a physical disability, the world treated me completely differently. So I come at it from both sides of the table. And I am also a healthy sexuality educator. Did I say that right, Mary?
Yep.
Okay. But anyways, that's me.
All right. So this is going to be kind of an open dialogue at many points. So we'll ask you to stay muted until we call upon people for questions. So we'll make that clear when we want you to go ahead and unmute and ask questions. I'll also be manning the chat box. So if you have questions as we're speaking, you can drop that in the chat box, and then I will cue either Jake or I to stop and pause periodically and answer those questions so we don't get too far along. Okay, we are ready for the next slide.
Okay, these are the general outcomes that we're looking to achieve today. Going a basic overview of what supported decision making is, basic overview of charting the life course framework, how to use the life course tools to support independent decision making, and to see some real life examples on how to use the tools to support the life you want. And finally, how to support others in achieving their good life, peer mentors perspective.
Okay, and Jake has the life course tools in his work at Health West. So he's going to share some examples. But we're going to start with a short 18-minute video. And this video was created by the Supported Decision Making Coalition at the state level, which is made up of many organizations at the state, as well as self-advocates and family members. And so we created this video as just a beginning base of our thoughts about supported decision making. We're going to watch it, and then we'll have time for a little bit of dialogue about it. So if you want to go ahead and play the video, Matt.
There's no question asked more often by parents of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, IDD, than what will happen to my son or daughter when I'm gone? As students approach adulthood, families often question whether or not to pursue guardianship. This decision is made more difficult by lack of information. Supported decision-making is an approach that encourages individuals with IDD to make their own life decisions. What does supported decision-making mean to you?
Individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities have the right, responsibility, and authority to make decisions.
There's no question asked more often by parents of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, IDD, than what will happen to my son or daughter when I'm gone? As students approach adulthood, families often question whether or not to pursue guardianship. This decision is made more difficult by lack of information. Supported decision-making is an approach that encourages individuals with IDD to make their own life decisions. What does supported decision-making mean to you?
Individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities have the right, responsibility, and authority to make decisions in their lives.
It used to be that as soon as young people turned 18 in the county of Midland, they were immediately in my court asking for a guardianship. The type of guardianship that this is, it's called a plenary guardianship, and there are two aspects to it. One is personal and the other is financial.
Supported decision-making to me means being able to live my life, but also having someone that I can run things past if I need the help.
Supported decision-making starts with the person. That is, the person has control over decisions that they make. Rather than giving the authority to someone else to make a decision on a person's behalf, the person retains that authority and gets help when they need it from someone else.
It's when people with disabilities receive the support they need and want to be able to make their own decisions and communicate those decisions to others, using trusted friends, family members, and professionals in their lives. But that's a technical definition. I think really supported decision-making is human decision-making. It's what you and I and everybody does every day.
We like to describe supported decision-making as anything that will assist a person with disabilities to take control of and direct important life decisions. Supported decision-making is more of an approach and a strategy for trying to figure out how to individualize a set of supports that will assist people not only to make the decisions in their lives, but to become better decision makers over time as they learn to make more and more decisions.
I use different people in my circle because I got a circle of friends and people that I work with that I trust to, when I have to make a big decision, to ask them what they think I should do. And then ultimately, I'll make the final decision for myself, because ultimately, it's my life, and not nobody else, and I gotta be able to control it.
It really can work differently for different people. I've seen some supported decision-making arrangements that are very formal, where people are using a team approach for supported decision-making. I've seen others that are very individualized, where a person might have a smaller trusted network. I've seen supported decision-making arrangements where people go to certain people for certain questions, like finances, like healthcare, and go to other people for other kinds of questions, like relationships. And I think it looks very, very depending upon who the person is and what their wants and desires are.
For me, the important decisions are made. I usually go to my guardian, who is my mother, but more so since I've moved out, I've really tried to make most decisions for myself and only go to them for ones that I should go to them for.
How is guardianship and supported decision-making different?
Guardianship is a legal relationship where a person is assigned by a judge to make decisions on behalf of another individual. So the difference between guardianship and supported decision-making is there's not a legal relationship established by a court. In supported decision-making, it's setting up arrangements so that the person has people involved in their life to help them make decisions. And it also means that people maintain their rights.
A guardianship is a really big deal. You take away all the freedoms of decision-making of that individual. And so I do not take that lightly. It's a big decision that a judge needs to make. So the sense of freedom that is associated without having a guardianship is important for quality of life. I mean, that's just a no-brainer. None of us want to have those kinds of strictures on our lives.
What the parent is doing is they're turning over that responsibility to the court, really. The court is now intervening between their child and themselves. I mean, that relationship now becomes altered in a way. There's no reason to go that route. And once we describe the different alternatives that are available to parents, generally they take them.
One of the things that we're finding in the research is that one of the first people who suggest guardianship to families is teachers at the IEPs when students are getting into that transition from childhood to the adulthood age. So early on, we need to make sure people understand that everyone needs support. Let's help people understand what the issues are, what the dreams are, so we can gather around and help folks achieve those. Guardianship could potentially take that all away.
What impact can guardianship have on a person with IDD?
Get up a certain time, like 5 a.m. in the morning, you shower, eat your meals, like a regular day, but I felt no freedom.
When my mom passed away, for some reason, that family member thought that they should somehow take over guardianship of me. And just based on like how my childhood had went and just how things were back then, I knew what it felt like to not have people give you choices and sort of not listen to you just because, you know, I had a disability. And I didn't want to have my choices taken away, especially since I was already living on my own and I had a job. I mean, I did have a disability and I did have disability benefits, but I was trying to make my own way. And so I didn't think that was fair, but I also knew that this person was very persuasive and could possibly make that happen. So I thought I didn't have any choice in the matter, and I felt that the only thing that I could do to protect myself from that was to run, so I left the country.
So what I see often with guardianship is that people rebel against decisions that they might have made themselves if they had been given the opportunity to make that decision themselves, right? It's when you're feeling like you're being forced to do something or someone else is in control of your life, then you begin to find other ways to have some control in your life. And sometimes those ways aren't very healthy or safe.
How does supported decision-making work in the lives of individuals?
At Quality Trust, for example, we work with both young adults who have not yet reached the age of 18, as well as people all the way through, you know, the later years. I'll start with some of the adults that we've worked with. For them, it's been a challenge because they may not have had in their early developmental years an opportunity to make decisions. And so therefore, they've already developed some preferences about which decisions they're interested in making and which decisions they're not. The other element that we often see is they may have learned some habits in life that they have to overcome in order to really become better decision makers. So they need a set of supports around them that will assist them to primarily think through what their options are and what the potential consequences of different strategies or approaches could be in their life as they approach major decisions. For younger people, it's really very interesting because for them, they're just starting out. And so what we see is important is that you really have to think about what are the new experiences that you need to expose them to so that they begin to take on more responsibility over time, that they may be part of their IEP meeting starting at age 15, 16, or 17. And so therefore, rather than the professionals around them talking to them about what things will happen to them, the professionals begin to talk to them about what options are available, what activities they could be involved in, and which ones fit best with who they are and what they want to achieve in their life now and in the future.
How can a person get their rights restored?
I'm not a lawyer, so I haven't helped somebody legally go to court and get their rights restored. But I have helped people get connected with lawyers that can help them do that, whether it's through the court or through setting up alternate supports. And sometimes it happens in stages. So I've helped people maybe reestablish some financial independence, certainly some legal independence, and also recognize that because they might have a partial guardianship, understanding the terms of their guardianship so that if it is kind of a process, they can go back to court over stages and have rights and responsibilities restored to them.
The requirement for a guardianship is necessity. So if the necessity no longer exists, in other words, the supports have come together in the community or with that particular person, so there's no longer a necessity for it, then you need to petition to have that guardianship terminated, in my opinion. And I'm thinking for my court, I have equal numbers of establishing guardianships for developmentally disabled as discharging.
I work for the ARC of Midland, and we're an advocacy organization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so, just as a rule, we have the position that every person is a citizen in the community, and every person should have opportunities and have the ability to contribute as citizens. Part of that is not having your civil rights removed, which is what guardianship can do, right? What guardianship does do. There are certain rights that you have that are given to someone else to exercise on your behalf. And so we've been strong advocates always for alternatives to guardianship, and we happen to have a probate judge who also sees guardianship as a very serious issue. When she imposes a guardianship on someone, she knows she's taking some of their rights.
A story that Jan Lampman likes to tell of a petition for guardianship that was filed on a developmentally disabled person, and they were having problems with economics and also relationships. And Jan was there in a supportive position. I pulled her up on the stand and I said, so we have this petition, do you feel that it's necessary? And her answer was very good. She said, well, I have relationship issues too, and I have financial issues too. So that cannot be the sole basis that we have a petition for a plenary guardianship. It needs to go to the heart of protection of the individual.
With respect to terminating guardianships, my philosophy is just don't go there in the first place. Again, my emphasis is on working with the school system when families are young and throughout their time in a public school setting, and with the educators that are working with them, be it the teachers, auxiliary staff. Let's just assume this person's going to be as autonomous as possible. Let's take a look from the get-go, from their little, about what is it to be self-determined, self-advocate, specific to the age too. So for little ones, they should be able to choose what color toothbrush they might want or what shirt to wear. And if it doesn't match, hey, what's the terrible thing about that?
Why is autonomy important?
People naturally want to be in charge of what goes on within their lives. Most of us would like to have some control. We like to take the responsibility, but with that responsibility also comes the authority to make some decisions. And so with the help of those individuals that love and know them, the autonomy gives people with intellectual and developmental disabilities an opportunity to be the person that they really want to be.
It's important to retain autonomy because autonomy is a fundamental human right, and it's part of what makes us all human. It's part of the inalienable rights that we have for ourselves and the rights that belong to people with disabilities alongside everyone else.
There have been years and years of studies that have shown that people with disabilities who have greater self-determination in their lives have better life outcomes. And that means they're actors in their own lives. They're not being acted upon, they're acting for themselves. They're more likely to be successfully employed. They're more likely to make that difficult transition into adulthood that happens when you leave school. They're going to be healthier, and I'm not only talking about psychological health, physically healthier. And so I think we need to take that very seriously, that promoting self-determination, regardless of what tool you use to support decision-making, needs to be the fundamental goal because people live better lives.
People retaining autonomy in their life is really part of a safeguard strategy, so that if you look at the data that has emerged over the last 20 years as we've started really tracking outcomes in people's lives, we find that when people are in more control of their lives, they feel more comfortable saying no, so that they're less likely to be pushed into doing something that they don't want to do. We also find that people are more connected to other people. For example, people rely on different folks in their larger social network to help them make decisions. They're actually going to people to get that advice prior to finding themselves in a bad decision. So they're comfortable going to people and asking for input rather than thinking they've got to do it all on their own. And again, that's another sort of safeguard that enables people to learn over time, as well as potentially avoid bad outcomes in their lives.
What supported decision-making tools can people with IDD use?
The best tool is listening to the person. I think that as we listen to individuals to determine what they would like to have happen to them, happen with them, to have the life that they want to live, we can use whatever tools are available to assist. I think that's where we really need to be mindful, because Every individual is just that, an individual.
My life now? All right, I can make my own decisions now. Went to high school, graduated, went to special education, living out in the community. Now I'm living into a home, a house. I drive my own vehicle. I'm on like 2 or 3 boards and involved in the city of Westland as a disability concern board as a chairperson on that board. The tools that I use is my own guardian, for example. If I want to go make a payment on a bill, make a payment. Or the decisions like going to see my doctor, for example, or making the decision to go out to a library. I think it's important for people to have that time for decision making. It's about their life if they want to live a self-determined life.
You need to take an approach that is very person-centered. You need to decide what tool for the person is going to be the least restrictive for whatever the situation is.
Parents are made to feel that they need to rush into these decisions. They do not. Slow down, make sure you understand all that's at stake here, understand what the alternatives are, all the supports that are out there.
All of us make mistakes, and so we can't hold individuals with disabilities to a different standard and say that they can't make decisions because they may make a mistake.
When we turn 18, we are legally able to make decisions, and that ability to have the self-worth, the knowledge, the self-respect to know that you are capable and respected as an individual who is independent and able to make decisions. People with disabilities want that same respect. With supported decision making, we are really honoring that value of maintaining an individual's autonomy and respecting their adulthood.
Using the principles of self-determination to make those kind of decisions, and using your circle to make sound decisions, because everybody deserves to take risks at some point in their life. Everybody has made mistakes, and nobody perfect, and no man is an island. So let's go for it in the most effective way we can and support people in making sound decisions. So they won't get stuck in the system and get caught up in the legalese of having guardians when they really don't have to have guardians, or somebody controlling their life other than themselves.
People have a hard time thinking about their life in a different way when you've always been put in the box and told this is what your life is and how it can be, and then someone else comes along and says, but what do you really want? And maybe it could be this way. Getting people to hear me at times and understand when it pertains to my own life that what I'm saying is really what I mean, and when I want something to happen in my life, it doesn't mean maybe, it doesn't mean that possibly I want it to happen. It means really this is what we're going to work on, and really this is where I want to go in life. This is why I really wanted to do this, because yes, I am making a choice, and yes, I know that I have to work on it, and I'm willing to do the work. Please listen and please hear that when we ask for something, we want to be heard.
Okay, thanks for watching the video. We're going to have Matt go on to the next slide. And I just want to pause for a minute and give opportunities for people to either drop a note in the chat, your thoughts about the video, or if you have any questions about what you saw and heard on the video. You can either electronically raise your hand. Matt will be watching, and you can unmute actually and just ask us the question. Okay, I'm watching the chat and I'm watching for hands raised. Questions or comments about the video? While we're waiting for people to think about that for a moment, I'll let you know that that video is available at multiple sites in Michigan. You can watch it on the DD Council website and see it there. It is housed under our supported decision-making tab, as well as a video from our 2018 Supported Decision-Making Summit where we invited Tina Campanella and Morgan Whitlatch that you saw on the video who are national experts on this topic. So we have some questions in the chat. We'll go to those first, and then we'll go to the raised hand that I see. So Kelly writes that it was a good video. Kate's saying it was very powerful. Chantel, I do not have a question. I'm enjoying the presentation, and helping to look at things differently. And that's really why we put that video together, because it's voices from lots of different people from around the state in different situations. There's some peer mentors on the video, there's CEOs from some CMHs on the video, but they're all talking about how the trends are changing, and we're looking at being truly person-centered and supporting people with their decisions rather than always going to the approach of guardianship. We have video was amazing, other people agreeing with that. I'm going to go now to the hand raised. Amy, is that you? Go ahead and unmute and ask your question. Okay, we're not able to hear you yet. If you want to unmute there.
Mary.
Hi, Amy.
Mary. Hi. I just want to say it's a good video. I've seen it more than once, as you know, and it's good. And I wish everybody could see it. I wish they would take it into the high schools.
Okay, well, we have some good news for you there. We'll talk about that at the end of the presentation, because we have 4 youth ambassadors in Michigan between the ages of 14 and 20 who are going to be helping us to get this information out to younger and younger audiences, so people can think about making those decisions well before they turn 18 and get practice and have resources that support them in decision making from a young age on. So we'll talk more about that later. All right, well, we're going to go on to the next slide. And what you see is a slide that Bonnie has. Oops, I'm sorry, go back one slide, please. The slide that you see there is one adult's experience. You saw Bonnie on the video. She has okayed, even though she's unable to be with us today, for me to talk about her situation a little bit. So Bonnie, usually starts out by saying she didn't start out being such a strong advocate, but the life that she led her into needing to be a strong advocate. During her senior year of high school, she was working at a chemical factory doing administrative work. So she had a good paying job in the community and was attending school as well. She was told she could never make enough money to support herself and that she should go on disability. So literally, because of her disability and how people perceived her disability, she was being kind of pigeonholed into a life of, don't try to work because you'll lose all your benefits. And that was the information and the support she was being given. So she goes on to say the advice she got was, that was because of her disability, was the idea that she shouldn't aspire to anything more than just living on disability benefits, which is not a huge amount. It keeps a person kind of at the poverty level for life, and not to aspire more. She felt like she didn't have enough guidance to support her at the time, and she didn't know that what she was hearing was not actually true. She was told a lot of myths and stereotypes that people still harbor about the disability movement. At age 20, she literally ran away to Mexico, which is kind of this unique situation because we always hear individuals from Mexico coming to the US for a better life. Bonnie was, because of the disability and because of the fact that she had an aunt that was threatening to do guardianship, to petition for guardianship of her when her mother passed away, she felt like she had to leave the US to have a free life. So it's kind of this unique situation that it's much better when you hear it directly from her. And now her life is very different. She has been the chair of the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council. She is a strong advocate. She's a sexuality educator. She's worked as a peer mentor. And now she works at the state crisis hotline and with a full-time job. She owns her own home and has a longstanding, healthy relationship. And so, when you think about the things she was told when she was younger about what her life could be like and not to aspire to too much, and then by making her own decisions, by making those choices, she now has the life that she really wants. So it's kind of interesting to hear, different life's perspectives and their experiences with guardianship. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so this one talks a little bit about just knowing where we're at in Michigan. This slide shares national core indicator data from 2017 and 18. We kind of lost some of that data. They weren't able to do a lot of the interviews during COVID. The DD Council is commissioning a new data report so we can compare county to county where we're at with guardianships. But just in general, look at this. In Michigan at that time, 81% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that were interviewed for national core indicators had some sort of guardianship. And that number combines full and partial guardians. We'll talk more about those terms in a minute. And then nationally, the percentage was only 43%. So we're almost double the national average. So we have to kind of think about that and ask ourselves why that is. I see somebody dropped in the chat, those numbers are insane. I mean, think about that. Why do we have twice as many guardianships as, the national figures? Can't answer that question other than that. I really feel like it's the way it's been done for many generations. And so there are, there's a whole variety of organizations and individuals that are really looking at how to change that. I see a hand raised. Go ahead.
So I'm also helping out with the ACT team as a peer, filling in because they're short-staffed, and we actually just had this conversation this morning in the meeting, talking about how people with mental illness are being taken advantage of in all forms, even unfortunately by our system and the way that we do things. A lot of people end up with guardians because maybe as an ACT team or as a team for outpatient or whatever, you come up with this conclusion to, start the petition or the paperwork for someone to get a guardian, and then they're wrapped in that system. I don't know how we could fix that, but I think maybe just reevaluating what qualifications an individual might need to meet before having a guardian should be revised. That's just, those numbers right there in front of me just makes me sad for everybody that we serve, because they no longer have that control over their life. And 95% of the time, their guardians could care less about their quality of life and aren't even involved in their treatment. So it's just a big problem as a whole. And maybe we need to also look at the qualifications to be a guardian and kind of revise that as well.
Yes, there's actually some laws that, some legislation that's being proposed, and we hope to strengthen, we at the Supported Decision Making Coalition hope to strengthen those laws even more. So there is some movement in making some change there. We're not there yet, but there's definitely a group of people working on that. I'll take one more question and then we need to move on to make sure we get through all of our slides. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have a son who is cognitively impaired. That's what they called it back in the 90s and so on. And I was told when he was 18 that, I had to become his guardian. And that was just the way that they did it. That's the way they presented it. And said that, I had to do it this way because of his disability. And so I did it. I did what they, what was suggested. Now, I've also pushed my son on my own to be as independent as possible. So where people didn't see his strengths, I advocated for him to show his strengths. Instead of denying him a job or whatever. And I've pushed and advocated in other areas for other clients that I have who have children who have disabilities as well. But I'm glad that they are finally looking at the way that they're doing things to change it and to help to give them a voice, because not everyone is willing to advocate for their loved one and to say, no, you don't have to sit home and wait for a check. You don't want to depend on, you can go out, you can do things, and there's a job for you. There's a job for anyone that so I look at his strengths, not his disabilities. I always have ever since he was born. And I try to put that out to other people as well, and the people I work with and other people in the community.
Thank you for that, Cynthia. I think that's important. Really, we all rely on a circle of supports. We might not call it that. When I need help with my taxes, because I don't want to deal with it, I hire somebody to do that. So that's kind of a circle of support. But nobody says to me, because you need help with your finances, we're going to get you a guardian. It just means I need help with that one aspect of my life. And so it's interesting how the community at large tends to look at people with disabilities in a different way. That because you have a barrier in one area, you get support. It's like an all or nothing thing. You either make all the decisions on your own or you get a guardian. And really everyone in the world has all that full spectrum of options. And instead we kind of pigeonhole people with disabilities. So we need to move on because I want to get through all these amazing slides, and we'll talk more about some things that are going on, Cynthia, and other avenues that we can talk to you specifically about at the end. So next slide, please. Jake, you're up.
All right, you can find the mute button. Guardianship is a legal situation under which one person or an entity exercises power over and on behalf of another person. That person is called a ward.
So really, people don't all understand what guardianship means. And often we hear situations like Cynthia, well, all the professionals working with my son, my daughter, my brother, my sister, interchange your family connection to that person, told me that this was the right thing to do. It's no different than when my aunt with Down syndrome was born in the 1940s. My grandparents, a very stoic Swedish man, was told the only good thing you can do is place your daughter in an institution, because you wouldn't be good parents if you took her home. Now, my grandfather listened because he thought professionals, doctors and nurses knew a lot, listened to them, but his final words were, we'll be taking my daughter home now. And so they brought my Aunt Sharon home, and she lived with us for most of her life. And so, it really just takes one person being heard and making that decision to try something different, and then being person-centered, looking at that individual, whether it's our son, our daughter, our aunt, our uncle, and surrounding them with the supports they need in the areas that they need it, and allowing them autonomy in the areas that they make choices about, that they can express their choices about. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Next slide, please. So it's just important to know specifically what guardianship is. A person has to file a petition. That person could be anyone. Jake could decide, Mary lost it at that presentation, and I really think she needs some support. I'm going to file for a petition to be her guardian. And the court is supposed to send me a notice that somebody has petitioned for guardianship of me. He could say, I was making poor decisions, I was unsafe with myself, all those kind of things. The judge either, reads the petition and decides either this doesn't right, or I'm going to schedule a hearing. And in the meantime, a notice of hearing is distributed to the alleged ward. In that case, it would be me and all the other parties. Now, what does all the other parties mean? It means whatever the person who filed the petition wrote on there are significant people in my life. So in my life, I have brothers and sisters, and I have a son who's an adult age son. I have friends. I have, a wide group of advocates that I'm aware of and that are my colleagues that might want to speak on my behalf. But the court doesn't notice to all of them to say, hey, so did you know somebody filed a petition on you, Mary, and that this needs to be addressed? I might not even know that a petition's been filed in order to get some legal support. Then there's an appointment of attorney for the alleged ward. But in many situations in Michigan, when it pertains to people specifically with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they don't hear from their lawyer till just before the hearing. In other words, I've been to a lot of courthouses for guardianship hearings where they meet their lawyer 5 minutes before they walk into the judge. And you know they're the lawyer because they're walking down the hall and they're carrying a briefcase and wearing a suit. And they might say, Mary, is there a Mary Boogaard in the crowd? And I'm like, I'm Mary. If I knew enough to show up to the courthouse that day because there was a petition filed. And they introduce themselves and say, I'm your lawyer, I'm going to represent you in there. Here's how it's going to go, blah, 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 a few minutes. And then we're in before the judge. And oftentimes it's kind of a slam dunk. So if I don't know to have people there to testify, if I don't know to gather information that says that I don't need a guardian, guardianship hearings can be very quick. I've been to some where we've been in the courtroom less than 5 minutes. So in that courtroom then, and I'll get to your question in just a moment, Jeannie, that attorney is supposed to represent the ward. There's a hearing and the court determination. So the judge makes the decision based on everything they hear in the court. The petition is either dismissed and the judge may say, Jake, you're wrong, Mary doesn't need a guardian. Everyone can leave court. Or a full or partial guardianship can be granted. And in either case, whether it's a full or partial, the annual report needs to be filed until the appointment is terminated. In the case of a partial guardianship, that they need to file an annual report, the guardian, but it needs to be reevaluated every 5 years. In the case of a full plenary guardianship, it doesn't even need to be brought back through court. So once somebody has a guardian, it's very difficult to get that changed. And we're going to talk more about that. And the trend is for people to start thinking about that. If you're in a guardianship, similar to what Cynthia was talking about, you can use supported decision-making if a guardianship is already there. Work on gaining as much independence as possible, much autonomy as possible, and putting safeguards in place, because the judge is making that decision because he's hearing a person is unsafe. And if you can show a judge that things have changed such in that person's life that they are safe because assistive technology has been put into place, because there's additional supports from, professional organizations or from the community available that can keep the person safe, those are the kind of things that you have to do in a court of law to undo a guardianship. So you can petition for a guardianship to be terminated, but it's a long and lengthy process. And judges don't want to hear that they made a mistake before. And so we're going to talk about this aspect of freezing people with disabilities in time. If, it was determined at one point that you need a guardian, you may not always have those same needs because other supports may have been put in place. Other people may have come into your life, assistive technology. And so you basically have to go to the judge and prove again that things have changed so much that that person is safe without a guardianship. All right, so I'm going to take one question. Jeannie, go ahead, and then we'll move on.
Why does the ward meet the person that's defending them 5 minutes or whatever the case is before their court hearing?
Well, that's not supposed to be the way it happens. They need to contact them, but picture a typical person with an intellectual or developmental disability living in a congregate facility. They call the facility, maybe somebody's in the office, maybe they answer the phone, maybe they don't. It might take a while for that message to get to the person with a disability. And it may or may not arrive to the people who support that person with disability, their family, advocates they work with. And so we don't always know the lawyer until just before things go before the court. So it's not the way it should be. And we're trying to get things changed. So part of current legislation that is being proposed that we're trying to, strengthen is to increase the amount of time between the petition and the hearing and be able to know that everyone gets informed of what's going on. There are people I know around the state, doesn't matter the county, around the state, that have told me They didn't find out they had a guardian until the guardian called them and said, I've been appointed as your guardian. So they weren't aware of the hearing, they weren't in court, or there was a change in their guardianship and they weren't aware of that. So those are all things that we want to work on here in Michigan. And there's a huge group of people starting to do that. So the trends are changing. For years, this is the way it's always been done, for generations. And now we have more and more people working on getting this changed. So let's go on to the next slide. I just want to make sure you understand the types of guardianship. So there's guardianship of the person, guardianship of the estate, and conservatorship. These are all things that people talk about. And I see Marshall dropped in the power of attorney. We'll talk a little bit about that as we move on in the presentation. So guardianship could be full or partial. If you have a guardianship, you want to make sure you know what it is. You want to read through those papers or have somebody read through them with you. Make sure you understand every aspect of it. In a partial guardianship situation, the person is assigned, the guardian is assigned by the court to make certain decisions over a person's life. Me as an adult to make decisions about other aspects of their lives. So for example, Jake may get the court to decide I need a partial guardian, and my guardian decides how my finances are spent. That's typically like conservatorship. They call that in some states. So every state calls these a little bit different. All right. So if you could go to the next slide, we should be on slide 8, Matt. Thank you. And there are two different laws in Michigan that govern guardianships. So the first law is EPIC. And so that is the law that covers a state planning for protected individuals code, EPIC. It's often just referred to as EPIC. And that's the law that pertains typically to individuals that have been diagnosed with a mental illness or senior citizens. And guardianship for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is governed under the mental health code. And those two codes are different. And so guardianship can be worded different and some of the terminology is different. And guardianship is different from in every state. So these are terms you might hear and we just want you to understand what that means. So guardianship of the estate means they have guardianship over your property. Guardianship of the person is more over making decisions over your daily life. And a partial guardianship could say, Mary can't decide where she goes to school, but she can decide where she lives. She can decide how to spend $20 of her money each month, but the rest of the money is decisions are made by the guardian. So you need to know what's in those papers and make sure you understand if it's a partial guardian, what it pertains to and what it doesn't. Because oftentimes we see situations where guardians act as a full plenary guardian, but once you get a chance to read through the papers, they're really only a partial guardianship. So you want to make sure you understand what that means. Okay, if you would go on to the next slide, we should be now on slide 9. Go ahead, Jake. And Jake, if you want, you can stay off mute so that it's easier. Go ahead.
All right. So the person's potential rights that are in jeopardy, deciding where to live, consenting or preventing any medical and health care or treatment, determining when and how to travel, spending their money, making changes in educational or vocational programs, participating in legal issues, for example, contracting or filing lawsuits, buying or selling property, and giving permission to have a picture taken and shown for public purposes.
So literally, if I had a full plenary guardian, say Jake was my full plenary guardian, he could say, I don't want Mary on screen. So I don't have the right to show my person on a video unless I have that signed off by a guardian. A social media page, a guardian could make a decision about that. A guardian could decide, and guardianship papers for partial guardianship say all kinds of things. we have one person in the Supported Decision-Making Coalition who did a study on what guardianship papers say. And there was a set of guardianship papers that literally indicated the person could decide how far to travel as far as their back porch. So in other words, if they were going to leave their back porch, they had to have a signed statement by their guardian approving that it was okay for them to do so. So guardianships can be very restrictive, and it is a loss of some or all of a person's civil rights. So that's why we fight so hard to make changes. Next slide. Jeannie, I see that you wrote in the chat, I thought that Michigan was an all or nothing. No, you can have a full or partial guardianship in Michigan. Okay. And we'll talk more about that as we move on. On this slide, we really want to talk a little bit about what are the main concerns people raise for somebody needing a guardian. So we often hear they need a guardian because they can't make decisions about education. And a lot of times when a student's in the school setting and they're about to turn 18, there's a fear on the parents' part that, well, I won't have any control over what classes they take. I won't be able to support them in school. I won't be able to attend their IEPs, and the school could be taking advantage of them. So the thought about guardianship isn't always it doesn't always come from a bad place. It comes from a place of caring about a person and wanting to protect a person. But what often happens is the protections go too far. So they don't think about other ways that the family member could still be involved. So in the case of a young student, the student can sign a paper with the school, a release of information form saying, I want my parents to attend my IEP. And then the school is required to do that. So there are things that can be put in place that are less restrictive and intrusive than guardianship that address every one of these concerns. So big ones, education, safety. They can't live on their own because they won't take their medication. Well, there's assistive technology that can be put into place where it can help remind somebody to take their medication. There's all kinds of things that can be put in place. Powers of attorney can be put in place that a person chooses when they're in a good space, somebody that they know and trust to be a power of attorney. And the power of attorney only kicks in under certain circumstances. So for example, I was power of attorney for my sister. My sister did not have a disability. She had multiple medical issues, and she wanted to make sure if she was ever in a situation where the hospital and the doctors wouldn't listen to her, that they legally had to listen to a person she knew and trusted. So if she was declared incapacitated by at least 2 doctors and they signed off on it, then my power of attorneyship over my sister kicked in. And they would have to abide by what I want with my sister. And so, there's lots of things that can happen, but I had no control over any other aspect of her life. She spent her money the way she wanted to spend it. And literally that power of attorney kicked in only when she passed away. So again, if somebody needs supports and wants supports in certain aspects of their lives, those can be put into place without guardianship and without removing other rights. Medical decisions. I see that all the time with my brother. During COVID, he needed to have a procedure done and he needs to have somebody with them. And so when we arrived at the hospital, they told me I couldn't enter in. Obviously, they don't know that I work for the Michigan Developmental Disability Council. And I said, well, actually, the law indicates that a person with a developmental disability can have one person with them. You can't deny me access. And as I was having that conversation with a security guard at the hospital, the doctor who knew me and also knew where I worked came out and said, let her in. Like you don't want to deal with that. Because I was like, oh, I'm coming in. And trust me, if you're about to give my brother a shot, you want to have me there. Because things are going to get really ugly if baby sister isn't there to hold his hand. And that's just something my brother does not like. And there's only one person that can get him to take a shot. And so, family members think about these things because they care and love the individual, but they often aren't told or aren't given ideas of other ways to handle it. So in that case, I just take him to any medical appointment where we think he might have a shot. Because you can see where that would go. He would go, they'd go to give the shot, he'd get combative, and then what's going to happen? a bunch of big orderlies are going to come and try and hold him down, and things are going to get really ugly. So it helps on both sides if people work together with the individual and the circle of support that they choose. Finances, communication, sexuality is a big one. You know, they'll make bad decisions about relationships. Well, I'll admit to all of you on the screen right now, I'm divorced. I've made a bad decision about relationships. Doesn't mean I need a guardian. And so there's also this idea that we often hold people to disabilities to a higher standard, as Judge Allen on the video talked about. You know, we can't expect to, you know, everyone in the world to make healthy decisions about relationships 100% of the time. We don't expect that of ourselves, but we somehow expect that of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that one comes all the time. And legal matters, signing contracts. So we can provide as much support as we want to help somebody understand a contract that they're about to sign, but that doesn't mean necessarily that we need to control their money, or that we need to control their relationship decisions, or that we need to control other aspects of their lives. So we really focus on helping people and supporting them with supported decision-making only in those areas of their lives that they need and want, and that assistance and support comes from people they've chosen. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. We should be on slide 10. I'm sorry, slide 11. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Jake.
Alrighty. So guardianship shall be utilized only as necessary to promote and protect the well-being of the individual, and shall be designed to encourage the development of maximum self-reliance and autonomy of the individual.
So you see MCLA chapter 6. We didn't make this up. Jake and I didn't plot before the meeting that we're just going to tell them our theory about this. Michigan compiled law chapter 6. That's what the law says. Now, in the guardianship situations that you've heard us talk about, it doesn't sound like they really understood what their responsibility was within the guardianship. You know, when we heard Cynthia talk, she gets it. She understands that as a guardian, I'm still supposed to be promoting and protecting the well-being of the individual and helping to design ways to encourage and develop the maximum self-reliance. So all guardians are under this mandate. All guardians don't understand that they're necessarily under that mandate, particularly when we have situations with public guardians where it's somebody the person may not have even ever met, and they may be guardian for many, many, many people, which is slightly different than when you have a family guardianship. Okay, let's go on to 12. Jake, you're up.
We all need supports, helpers, and consultants in our lives in order to make good decisions, whether we have a disability or not. So every person needs support with all the things in life. And we all have our own strengths and weaknesses. So some examples of some supports that I've had in my life is there was a time where I was medically incapacitated, and I had to, or I was ruled as somebody who was not able to be my own guardian. However, my dad luckily was somebody who listened to me, and he said, well, I'm going to make myself financial power of attorney, and we'll make your social worker your guardian. And that way there's power of check and balances with decisions in regards to how they were made in my life.
So we mentioned, you know, kind of wanting to change things. So in some of the current legislation that's being proposed, that's an aspect that we want to do to make it harder for the same person to have that much control in one person's life. Someone's a full plenary guardian and a conservator. And so they have total control over the person's money, their body, their property, all of that. And so that's an aspect of how we want to try and change things. That's just one aspect of what we want to change in the current proposed legislation. Let's go on to the next slide, slide 13. So again, in short, supported decision-making and guardianship, how are they alike and how are they different? Okay. Guardianship is a substituted decision maker. somebody has legal authority to make decisions for you. They don't always make them with you, they make them for you. So that's legally binding. It limits your rights, your choices, and your freedoms. Whereas supported decision-making is a process that enables people with disabilities to retain and exercise their rights and make and communicate choices in regard to personal and legal matters. I see a hand up. I'll go ahead and take one question before we move on. Go ahead, Kiara. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, you are. Thank you.
Okay.
Just a quick question. It just came up as you guys were talking. So usually like in a divorce case or custody case, if a child is a certain age, I think it's 13, the judge will ask them what they would like to do. Do individuals who are facing guardianship have that same opportunity or no?
They're supposed to be given that same opportunity. So that is the lawyer's job that's assigned to them in court, irregardless of whether it's an elderly individual, whether it's a person with a mental illness or a person with a developmental disability. You're supposed to have the opportunity through your lawyer to communicate to the judge what your thoughts are about it. And what we see in Michigan is it varies from county to county and from court within county. So some of our larger, more metropolitan areas, the Detroit area, Grand Rapids, might have multiple courts. And so you have multiple probate judges making these decisions. And you can go to one court and, you know, have them really listen to the potential ward. And you can go to another court where it's just the judge is talking to the lawyer and not really even recognizing that the person with the disability is even in the room. So yes, they are supposed to have that opportunity. Ultimately, the decision's up to the judge. Go ahead, Jake.
I was just going to say, in my 20 years of working in the field, that's not been something that's been astutely observed at all. There's been very little communication between, well, where I'm at now, we have a guardian ad litem, and usually our people don't see them until they hit the courthouse. So,
right.
So isn't that some sort of recipient rights thing? Or would it be if somebody made a big deal about it?
It would be if they did not have the guardian ad litem there or the lawyer to represent the person there, but.
So there's two different things. Recipient rights governs individuals supported by a community mental health in Michigan, or what we call behavioral health in Michigan. Recipient rights has authority there, but they don't have any right outside of the community mental health. So if somebody has a person paid by a CMH that's providing services, they can file a recipient rights complaint for something that they did. But this is outside, and a probate court would trump recipient rights. So again, it's very difficult in these situations. We're going to whip through the next couple of slides because we want to get to the end portion. I got to catch up to where you're at, Matt. You have which slide up? Okay, what I need you to go to, Matt, is just go ahead to slide 14. Okay, so supported decision-making is not really all that complicated. There's basically 5 steps to it. It can be formal or it can be informal. So it starts with step 1. You need to start that conversation with people. Where do you need support? Where are you able to make decisions? And we're going to share some tools in just a few moments here on how to do that. Second step is identifying who is willing and able to assist you in those particular areas. Then you do the planning and you communicate. You can set up the agreement. Now that could be a verbal agreement. It could be written into a person-centered plan. Like this could be discussed at a pre-planning meeting or at a PCP meeting and then written into the plan. It could be a formal supported decision-making arrangement. Now those aren't necessarily legally recognized in Michigan, but if you have your wishes in writing, that helps. Some doctors, some lawyers will honor that. Some might not. And so you need to think about that. And we're going to share where you can get some of these tools later. So once the agreement's set up, then you need to let everyone know. So in the case of my brother, we need to make, because he received some supports from the CMH, we need to make sure that every new case manager he gets, and sometimes he gets them new ones every 6 months, it's like training them all over again. Okay, here's who all of his supporters are, and here's the decisions he makes on his own. And we want to honor and respect his right and his autonomy in his life for as long as possible. And my brother's 61. So, we've been at this his whole life. And every appointment, it's like telling people all over again and communicating what his wishes are and showing them the tools that he's filled out where he's communicated what his hopes and dreams are for his lives. So I appreciate what Kelly just put in there. Can peer mentors help with this for other peers? Absolutely. And we're going to get to that in the next few slides. Jay's going to share some of the work that he's done as a peer mentor. We're going to skip over listing all the supports and go right to slide 17, Matt. Okay, so here's one set of tools, and there is no one way to do supported decision making. There's no one way to do person-centered planning. Life Course is one set of tools, and we want to share that one set with you today. So Charting the Life Course was created to help individuals and families of all abilities and all ages develop a vision for a good life and think about what they need to know and do. Identify how to find or develop supports and discover what it takes to live the lives that that individual wants. So there's a whole system. Next slide, please. And it's a holistic approach. People lead whole lives made up of specific, connected, and interconnected life domains that are important to a good quality of life. Life domains are different aspects and experience of life that we all consider as we go. It involves things I see some people wrote in the chat: housing, employment, relationships. There's not just one aspect to our lives, there's multiple domains. And you may need support in one of those, but not the other ones. So it's really kind of, these tools help to investigate all of that. Next slide, please. And it's about achieving outcomes for connected life domains like the daily life and employment, community living, social and spiritual, healthy living, safety and security, and citizenship and advocacy. So when you're a part of a supported decision-making circle, you want to look at the person holistically. Next slide. So how do Life Course tools fit within the topic of supported decision-making? Life Course has put out some amazing tools specific to helping circles of supports really think about how do we help a person kind of diagnose and dissect where they need support and where they don't. Next slide. We're just going to go on to slide 22. I think you probably figured out from the presentation so far where the council's values are about supported decision-making. We really want people with disabilities and their families to know they have equal rights, and that persons requiring support in decision-making must be provided with access to the supports they need and things like that. You've probably gotten that from me already. So let's go to slide 22. And this is one of the Life Course tools. Are you on slide 22? Matt's catching up to me here.
Yeah, I don't have the slide numbers.
Okay. It says Life Course supported decision-making tools at the top. Okay. Think you have it there. So this is called a trajectory. And in this tool is really where you think about the past life experiences of a person that can really impact how they, experience the world around them now. The vision for what they want and the vision for what they don't want. So imagine having this form at a pre-planning meeting. Case managers and support coordinators are like, it's so difficult to pull all this information out with all these people that we work with. So Life Course put it in some short, quick little tools. And so this is a quick tool that just kind of helps you think about all of those things. And it could be filled out with the individual in pre-planning to give that support coordinator or case manager a ton of information about who they should be talking to before the PCP meeting, to give that individual a well-rounded conversation about who they want invited to their meeting and where and when they should have it. Go to the next slide, please. These are two other tools. We should be on slide 23, and it has two pictures side by side of life course tools. Right there. And so these tools are also helpful. And the one on the, I'm making sure I'm on the right. Okay, the one on the left is a tool that really gets you and this circle of support for the individual to think about all these life domains and what decisions they make in their life now, where they need support, and if they need a substitute decision maker for any of those. And then what you can do as a team is look at that middle column, and you can say, okay, they need some support with taking medications, and go through that list of tools in our package. And you'll have this PowerPoint to be able to look back at that and say, okay, they need help taking medication. What assistive technology could we put in place to make that happen consistently? Or they need help with finances. Let's work with them now in a budgeting program to learn how to budget their money. And so again, not freezing people in time, but giving them opportunities to learn and to grow as all people do throughout their lives. And again, the PowerPoint is on the, I'm answering a comment by Laura. The PowerPoint is on the conference webpage, so you can pull this up later and look more at these forms. And we're going to share some links in just a few minutes with you of where you can find additional forms. Now, the star at the right is a way of really thinking about where those resources could come from, helping a person think about who's in their life now and who you might want to help them add to their life so they can build their social capital and be able to build their circle of support as well. It helps people to think about assistive technology and think about those eligibility specific services, but also services within the community. So I'll give you some examples of that. Oftentimes when a professional does one of these stars on their, about themselves, about their own life, and we recommend that you do before you ask somebody else to do it, we think only about stuff in our community. But when we think about people with disabilities, we oftentimes only think about eligibility specific services, and we flip that. It's just the opposite. Assistive technology, relationships, and really starting at the top of the star with what the person's personal strengths and attributes are that they can contribute to their plan. And so it's really kind of setting a mindset for how you're going to create goals with that individual that are then going to end up on their person-centered plan. Next slide, please. And Jake, you're up. Jake's going to talk a little bit about how he's used some of these tools. Go ahead, Jake.
All right. This is an integrated support star that I completed on myself. When going through the process of learning to implement a new tool from your life skills toolbox, you should always use it on yourself first to help you better understand what you're asking of the people that you're supporting. I spent several days completing the star above to identify my strengths and my weaknesses in each of the 5 domain areas. I always start with the personal strengths.
In the blue section at the top of the star. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Personal strengths and assets, or like the way I like to explain it is, what does, whatever the person's name is, what do you bring to the table in order to, what do you bring to the table to help with solving what we put in the middle of the star? So the question in the middle. And then for the relationship section, I like to present that to people I work with as, who do you have in your life that could possibly provide you with some help, advice, direction when it comes to working on the highlighted square. So I luckily had a lot of good relationships and protective factors in my life. So the eligibility specific section, the eligibility specific section has been one that has been challenging for a lot of people I work with. It is especially challenging some of the older people I work with. My theory is that they were raised in a deficit-based culture, and this is what's wrong with you, and so this is what we're gonna do to make you better, so you aren't as much of an inconvenience.
All right, Jake, we're gonna need to move on because we've just got a few minutes left, and I want to see them to
Okay,
see some of the
sorry.
other tools that you used. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So anyways, that moving on to the next slide then, 25. This is an image of an integrated support star that I completed with one of the individuals that I mentor. This star was done with the focus of a goal to get up on time. And then so we had to look at what was causing him to not get up and get out the door on time. Well, we were able to reverse engineer it through this, and it came down to removing the clutter, I believe, on top of his dresser. But now he's been getting up and going to work on time. So it's a success.
So these tools can be used to solve lots of different problems. I really want them to see the next slide, which is there we go, that one. Do you want to talk a little bit about that one, Jake?
Yeah, it's the schedule one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the schedule we worked on building out in this person's life, we looked at all the different elements with several subsequent stars. I mean, we did multiple stars about the same question based on where they were at in their treatment, and they have been using the sheets to track their consistency and completing the tasks. And so they can identify which areas of the routine need to have a bit more focus for them. And the plan is that they take the integrated star tool from the framework and use it as they move along their trajectory with a fuller and more well-connected life.
All right, we need to wind up because they only have 5 minutes before the next. I'm getting a message from Matt. So Matt, if you would go on to the wrap up, and then we'll stay on for a few minutes to ask any other questions. So that the tool that Jake was just talking about can be really good for support coordinators to use sort of for 368-hour calendar, which is the number of hours in a week, and kind of helping to fill in where somebody needs support and where they don't. So like if you're trying to figure out you have only a limited amount of CLS staffing, it can be good to help you figure out where that should be, where that's best utilized. So Jake, go ahead and do the wrap up.
All right, I was just going to say also about that planning thing, it's very, very helpful to do it on yourself first. It gives you a whole new perspective. So being a strong advocate, be involved in your own life, communicate what you want and what you don't want. Plan using the tools that work for you, be person-centered. Explore the supports that you will need to continue to be in charge of your life. Tie back to the all. Start young and continue teaching throughout, teaching and learning throughout life. Don't freeze people in time. And how peer mentors can be involved in my experience with peer mentorship. A big part of the thing has just been helping people realize their self-worth. That's what it comes down to, is that they are people and they need to be seen as people.
So we want to thank you all for attending. The last few slides are just support. So again, you can get that off the conference webpage, and it lists where you can find supported decision-making arrangements, lots of web pages, and where you can get more information about life course tools. So if you have questions, you can follow up with me, Mary Shehan-Boogaard. All of the council staff information is on Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council website. Thanks for attending today, and thanks for the good questions and comments. Bye, everyone.